Settle in. Get comfortable. Some nights are longer than others. Some nights are exactly as long as they need to be. Chapter 1. The Choosing. The great hall smelled like pine smoke and nervous wolves. Hope Granger stood near the back, between the candle shelf and a pillar wide enough to disappear behind if things went sideways. She'd come because attendance at the solstice choosing was technically mandatory. She'd positioned herself because 12 years of being a Granger had taught her exactly how much space a room was willing to give her. Not much, but enough to stand in. The hall was full. Every wolf of rank, every elder, every council member with a seat they'd warmed into the shape of their own importance. The fires burned high. The king's table was set at the far end. Not a throne, not on a dais, just a long, scarred table where the Wolfguard line had sat for 6 generations. Alex Wolfguard sat behind it like a man who had been carved to fit the chair, which was probably the problem. Hope had seen him from a distance plenty of times. Council gatherings, territory runs, the midwinter hunt where every wolf in the kingdom came to pretend they enjoyed running through half-frozen mud for the honor of a king's attention. He looked the same way he always looked, composed, attentive, and carrying something behind his eyes that no one had the nerve to ask about. Finally, Flint said. Hope's jaw tightened. Finally what? But her wolf didn't elaborate. Flint never elaborated. She was the most patient thing Hope had ever encountered, and Hope had spent 12 years tending a fire that took 40 minutes to catch on a wet night. Flint made the fire look impatient. Finally, Flint said again, like she'd been waiting for Hope to stop interrupting so she could repeat herself. The tradition was simple. On the longest night, the king chose one wolf from the kingdom to sit vigil with him from sundown to sunrise. The wayfire on the high ridge, the oldest signal fire in the territory, was lit, and the king and his chosen kept it burning until dawn. If the fire lasted the night, the year ahead was blessed. If it went out, well, it never went out. Hope made sure of that. It was, after all, her fire. Most years the king chose his beta, sometimes an elder. Once, in a gesture of politics so transparent it had embarrassed everyone involved, Alex's father had chosen the head of the river territory and used the 12 hours to negotiate a trade agreement while pretending to commune with the solstice spirit. The solstice spirit had been unimpressed. So had everyone else. Hope shifted her weight. The sooner he picked Marsh, the sooner she could leave, climb the ridge alone, and tend the fire, without a king sitting next to it, watching her like she was a problem he'd been meaning to solve and kept putting in the wrong drawer. Alex stood. The room got that particular quality of silence that meant people were holding their breath and trying to look like they weren't. The solstice fire carries us through the dark, he said, the formal words, centuries old. His voice was steady, low, the kind of voice that filled a room without effort because it didn't try to. I name the wolf who will keep the longest night with me. Marsh, Hope thought. Get on with it. Hope Granger. The silence changed. It went from anticipatory to the kind of quiet where everyone is recalculating something at the same time and arriving at answers they don't like. 26 council members, 40-odd pack wolves, every single one of them thinking the same thing. Granger? The candles didn't flicker, because candles don't care about social upheaval. But Hope would have sworn the fire at the far wall leaned. Finally, Flint said, a third time. Calm as a lake in dead wind. As though she had been saying this word for 12 years, and the world had finally caught up, and she had opinions about the delay. Hope did not move. She did not look around. She did not give the room the satisfaction of seeing her face do anything at all. She had been practicing this particular skill since she was 13. The art of receiving information that changes things while appearing entirely unchanged. She was very good at it. She was the best in the room, and the room was full of wolves, and wolves were supposed to be good at hiding things, and she was still better. From 3 rows ahead, Marsh, Alex's beta, a steady, broad-shouldered wolf with the facial expression range of a closed door, turned and found her in the crowd. His look said several things at once. The top 3 were, "Did you know about this?" and "I didn't know about this," and "This is going to be a very long night for someone." And I am grateful it's not me. Hope met his eyes, held them for exactly 2 seconds, and looked forward. Alex was watching her. Of course he was watching her. The whole hall was watching her. But his gaze was different from the rest. Everyone else was curious. He was bracing. Something in her, the part that had been reading rooms since she was 13, the part that always knew which faces would turn away before they turned, clocked it. He was afraid. Not of her, of what she'd say. She said nothing. She inclined her head, the formal acceptance. She walked toward the door because that was the protocol. The chosen wolf left first, and the king followed. The crowd parted for her. It always parted for her, but usually because people wanted distance. Tonight they parted because she was the king's chosen, and the corridor they made was narrow and lined with faces she'd spent 12 years learning to read at a glance. Marsh caught her arm as she passed, gentle, brief. "He didn't tell me," he said, low enough that only wolf ears in close range would catch it. Should he have? Marsh's mouth did something that on a more expressive man would have been a smile. No, he should have done this years ago. I've had a speech prepared, several speeches. I've been workshopping them. You've been workshopping speeches about me? I've been workshopping speeches about him. You just happen to be the reason the speeches exist. He let go of her arm. Don't let him off easy. Have I ever let anyone off easy? That, Marsh said, is why I've been looking forward to this. She kept walking. The walk from the Great Hall to the Ridge Trail took 20 minutes through the lower fields and another 30 up the switchback path. They walked it in silence. Hope 2 paces ahead because she knew the trail, Alex behind her because he didn't, and neither of them acknowledging this arrangement, because acknowledging it would require a conversation neither was prepared to have. The sun sat on the ridge like a coal refusing to go out. She could feel him behind her. Not just the sound of his boots on the frozen ground, not just the displacement of air that came with someone his size moving through the world. She could feel the particular quality of his attention, the focus of a man who had chosen something he couldn't unchoose and was now walking toward it. He's nervous, Flint observed. I know, he should be. Halfway up the switchback, he stumbled on a root she'd been stepping over for 12 years without thinking. She heard the boot catch, the half-second recovery, the deliberate continuation as though the route had simply not happened. She did not look back. She did not slow down. She did, however, allow herself a single, private moment of satisfaction that the alpha king of the Wolfguard territory had nearly face-planted on her trail. Petty, Flint said. Accurate, Hope corrected. The Wayfire clearing opened at the top of the ridge, like a palm held up to the sky. The old stone circle, 12 boundary stones, most of them cracked, 3 of them overturned, all of them marked with the Granger Waykeeper sigil, ringed a fire pit that had been burning on solstice nights for longer than the Wolfguard name had existed. Hope crossed the circle without ceremony. She knelt at the pit. The kindling was already laid. She'd done it that morning, the way she did every solstice morning, alone, before dawn, hands chapped and breath visible. She struck the flint. The tinder caught. She fed it with the particular patience of someone who had kept this fire alive for 12 years and did not intend to let it die because a king was watching. Alex stood at the edge of the stone circle. He had not stepped inside it. He stood with his hands at his sides and the posture of a man who had been in charge of a kingdom for 6 years and had just arrived at the one place in it where he was not in charge of anything. You can come in, she said without looking up. The stones won't bite. He stepped inside. She heard the slight hesitation, his boot on the frost-hardened ground, the pause, the second step. He stood behind her and said nothing, which was the most useful thing he'd done all evening. The fire caught properly. The flames climbed. The last of the sun slipped below the ridge, and the longest night began. Now, Flint said. Now it starts. Chapter 2. The First Fire. Alex Wolfguard had fought border skirmishes, stared down 3 separate challenges for territory from wolves who outweighed him, and once spent an entire council meeting listening to Elder Pruitt describe his theories about the spiritual significance of mushroom placement on the Northern Trail without losing his composure. None of that had prepared him for this. She crouched by the fire like she belonged there, like the fire was an extension of her, and the ridge was an extension of the fire, and he was a very large, very unnecessary addition to a system that had been functioning perfectly well without him. He had never felt less essential. He had conquered border disputes with less effort than it was taking him to stand here and not be in the way. "The fire is adequate," Karen offered. Alex ignored him. His wolf had been doing this all evening, offering observations about absolutely anything except the woman 3 feet away. The stars, the frost pattern on the boundary stones, the structural integrity of the fire pit, the probable species of an owl they'd heard on the switchback, the aerodynamic properties of the wind. Karen had opinions about all of it, careful, detailed, thoroughly considered opinions. He had no opinions about Hope Granger, none whatsoever. She was simply not a subject that required comment. She was, as far as Karen was concerned, furniture. That owl was large, Karen added. Probably a gray. They nest in the eastern pines this time of year. Worth noting, for future reference, in case we need to know about owls. It was not worth noting. Nothing about the owl was worth noting. The owl had been unremarkable in every measurable way. But Karen was committed to the owl, and Alex was not going to argue with his own mind in front of a woman who could probably hear the argument anyway. "There are rules," Hope said. She hadn't looked at him since the trail. She was adjusting the fire with a long iron poker that she'd pulled from a gap between 2 of the boundary stones. She had things cached everywhere, he was realizing. Practical things. A canvas bag of kindling under a flat stone, an iron kettle tucked behind the windbreak, a wool blanket folded into a stone niche, a second striker, something in a flask that he would learn about later and regret learning about. "Rules," he repeated. "The vigil has rules. You didn't know that." It wasn't a question. He almost said, "I knew that," and then stopped, because something in the air between the fire and the frost felt like it would know if he lied. "I didn't know that," he said. She glanced at him, just a glance, quick, assessing, like a wolf clocking movement at the tree line. "The first rule is the fire. It doesn't go out. That's mine. Don't touch it." "I wasn't going to. You were about to offer to help. I can tell by the way you're standing." She turned back to the flames. "You're standing like a man who is about to do something useful and is looking for something useful to do. There is nothing useful for you to do. Your job is to sit there and not let the fire go out. My job is to actually not let the fire go out. Yours is ceremonial." He sat. It was not a dignified sitting. There was no chair, no bench, no convenient height of stone. There was frozen ground, and he lowered himself onto it with the careful deliberation of a man who ruled a kingdom and had just been told his job tonight was ceremonial. She said ceremonial, Karen observed. That is a word that means decorative. She is saying we are decorative. I know what ceremonial means, just confirming, in case the cold is affecting cognition. The second rule is the truth. Alex felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Between sundown and sunrise on the longest night, you don't lie. Not to the fire, not to the dark, not to the wolf sitting across from you. She set the poker against a stone. "It's not magic, it's tradition. But the tradition is older than the kingdom, and I keep it." "What happens if I lie?" "Nothing. The fire won't spit at you. The stones won't crack." She sat back on her heels. The firelight caught her face, sharp, steady, framed by dark hair she'd tied back with what appeared to be a strip of leather. Her eyes were the color of creek water in November, clear brown, cold, and honest. "You'll just know you did it, and so will I." "That is," Karen said, with the studied neutrality of a wolf examining a distant and purely theoretical problem, a deeply unfortunate rule. "Yes," Given the specific circumstances of this evening and the general situation regarding Cairn, yes, fine. The wind picked up. The fire leaned east. Hope reached for a piece of wood from the stack. She had an entire system, he realized, a graduated arrangement of fuel from kindling to quarter-split logs to the heavy rounds that would burn for hours, and placed it with the precision of someone threading a needle, while the needle was on fire, and the thread was a kingdom's entire annual blessing. The fire steadied. The wind could not touch it. He was cold. He was, in fact, profoundly, embarrassingly, comprehensively cold. The ridge was exposed, the night was clear, and the temperature was dropping with the personal commitment of something that hated him specifically. He was wearing his formal cloak, heavy wool, lined, appropriate for a walk from the Great Hall to the ridge, and it was not enough. It was not close to enough. It was the wrong cloak. He should have brought the campaign cloak. He should have brought 3 campaign cloaks, and a tent, and possibly a small fire of his own. Hope was wearing a patched canvas coat, a scarf wound twice around her throat, and the general air of someone who had stopped noticing cold around the same time she'd stopped noticing that the kingdom had opinions about her family. She was not cold. She was visibly, aggressively, almost rudely not cold. He should offer her his cloak. That was the protocol. A king offered, a subject accepted. She would not accept. He knew this the way he knew that Karen was about to say something about the owl. The owl. He offered anyway. My cloak, no, is available if, no, I'm not using it effectively. Then that's a problem with your circulation, not a reason for me to wear your cloak. She adjusted a log. I run a fire on a mountaintop in winter. I have excellent circulation. You sit in a heated hall and make decisions. Your circulation reflects that. She just described our cardiovascular system as administrative, Karen said. I heard her. She's not wrong. You're cold, she said. I'm fine. She looked at him. The truth rule. Right. I'm cold, he said. How cold? I would describe it as significant. Significant. My feet are no longer reporting in. I've lost communication with my left ear. My fingers are operating on a voluntary basis, and several of them have volunteered to stop. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. Not quite. A flicker, like a candle flame in a draft. There and gone before he could name it. But it was there. He had made Hope Granger almost smile. This was, he suspected, a more significant achievement than most of the things he'd done as king. Her mouth moved, Karen observed. Then, with badly feigned indifference, interesting. Anyway, the eastern stars. Stop. There's a windbreak if you sit by the eastern stones. She nodded toward the far side of the circle. The old waykeepers angled them for it, my grandmother's design. He moved. She was right. The stones cut the wind, and the heat from the fire reached him properly for the first time. He sat down on the frozen ground with his back against a boundary stone that a Granger had carved, and a Granger had placed, and a Granger had been publicly stripped of credit for. The warmth from the fire hit him like a mercy he hadn't earned, which was becoming a theme for the evening. An hour passed. She fed the fire twice. He offered to help carry a log, a heavy round, from the far stack, and she looked at him with an expression that suggested he had offered to perform surgery on the fire using a spoon. You pick it up from the bottom, she said. I know how to. You were about to pick it up from the top. The bark at the top is loose. You'd lose half the fuel on the walk over and scatter hot ember fragments in a radius of approximately 6 feet, which includes both of us and the entirety of the blessed solstice fire. She took the log from behind him without moving him out of the way, which required her to reach past his shoulder close enough for him to feel the warmth of her arm through his cloak. I'll do it. She did it. She placed it. The fire climbed. She did it better, Karen said. She did it significantly and measurably better. Thank you, Karen. It's important to acknowledge competence in others. Growth mindset. Please stop. Fine. You chose me, she said. Not angry, not grateful, just factual. Yes. Why? The truth rule sat in the air between them. He could feel it, not as magic, not as compulsion, but as the simple, terrible awareness that she was watching and she would know. The wind has changed direction, Cairn said, suddenly very interested in meteorology. It's now coming from the northwest. This will affect the fire pattern in… Cairn, she asked a question. I know she asked a question. I am providing weather data. These are unrelated activities. They are not unrelated activities. Fine. Because I've owed you a conversation for 12 years, Alex said, and I was running out of reasons not to have it. Hope didn't react. She watched the fire. The poker rested against the stone next to her hand, and the firelight made her shadow long and steady. That's honest, she said finally. I'll give you that. He wanted to ask if she was angry. He wanted to ask if she hated him. He wanted to ask approximately 9 different things that all began with, I'm sorry, and all ended with something inadequate. Instead, he said, tell me about the other rules. There are no other rules. You said rules, plural. Fire, truth, that's the plural. She almost smiled again. Almost. What were you expecting, a liturgy? I was expecting at least 3 rules. 2 feels structurally unsound for an ancient tradition. The 3rd rule is don't complain about the cold. But I assumed that one was obvious, and I've already been proven wrong about that assumption. She has 3 rules, Cairn said. She was withholding the 3rd one for comedic purposes. I am aware. I like her, Cairn said. Then, immediately, as though the words had escaped from a cage he thought was locked. I mean the fire. I like the fire. The fire is well constructed. Moving on. Alex pulled his cloak tighter. The night was just beginning, and the woman across the fire was already better at everything than he was. He was in an enormous amount of trouble. Chapter 3. The Long Hours. The thing about a 12-hour night was that eventually the formality ran out. You couldn't be correct with someone for 12 hours. The body wouldn't allow it. The cold wouldn't allow it. The fire, which needed feeding every 40 minutes and which forced them both into proximity when she moved around the pit to adjust fuel from different angles, created a rhythm that protocol couldn't survive. By the 4th hour, Hope had stopped watching him the way you watch a stranger and started watching him the way you watch a fire, with attention but not urgency. He'd settled. That surprised her. She'd expected him to fill the silence with kingly noise, speeches, questions, the careful management of someone who is used to controlling every room he entered. He didn't. He sat against his stone, wrapped in the blanket she'd finally given him. He'd held out for 2 hours past the point of reason, which she respected in a deeply stupid way, and drank the barn-floor drink she'd poured him without complaint. Well, without verbal complaint. His face had complained extensively. His face had filed a formal objection, appealed, lost the appeal, and accepted its fate. His wolf, she could feel it, a low, steady presence behind his eyes, kept drifting. Not toward her. Away. Like a dog that knew it was in trouble and was performing casual interest in everything except the thing it had done. His wolf knows, Flint said. Knows what? That he's here for real. Not politics. Real. You don't know that. Flint didn't argue. She never argued. She just sat in the back of Hope's mind with the unshakable certainty of a wolf who had been right about everything for 12 years and saw no reason to start being wrong now. It was Flint's single most irritating quality. And Flint had several irritating qualities. And being right about all of them only made them more irritating. Your fire pit, Alex said. It was the first thing either of them had said in nearly an hour. What about it? You built it differently than the old diagrams show. The intake is lower. The reflector stones are angled wider. He was studying it, actually studying it, not performing interest. His eyes tracked the fire's behavior with the focus of someone who was used to reading systems. It throws more heat to the sitting positions and less into the air. Hope blinked. She had not expected him to notice that. She had not expected anyone to notice that. The fire pit modification was the kind of quiet technical achievement that no one commented on because no one knew enough to see it. You've seen the old diagrams? The Waykeeper records. They're in the lower archive. Or they were before. He stopped. The silence had weight. Before my father was stripped and the records were sealed, Hope finished. Her voice was level, flat as a lake before a storm. You can say it. Truth rule. Before that, he said quietly. She reached for the poker, adjusted a log that didn't need adjusting. The fire threw sparks. You read the Waykeeper records. When I was 15, before any of it happened. Your father's notes on fire construction were the most detailed in the archive. He drew diagrams with annotations. A pause. His handwriting was terrible. Something cracked in her chest, small, hairline, the kind of fracture you don't notice until much later, when you try to carry something heavy and the whole thing gives way. Her father's terrible handwriting. The way he wrote his sevens with a crossbar. The ink stains on his left cuff because he was left-handed and dragged his hand through every line. She didn't show it. 12 years of practice. He would have been pleased to hear the king read his notes, she said. He would have been extremely smug about it. Insufferably smug. He once made my mother listen to him explain his reflector stone theory for 40 minutes, and then asked if she had questions, and she said, yes, one. When is dinner? And he said, after you acknowledge the breakthrough. And she said, the breakthrough is that I married you, and I'm beginning to question the methodology. The laugh came out of Alex before he could stop it. Short, startled, genuine. The sound of a man who had not expected to laugh on this ridge tonight and had been caught by it. His composure cracked for half a second, and what was underneath was warmer than the fire. His laugh, Cairn said. And then, with the pained dignity of a wolf being dragged by its own leash, the reflector stones are... No, I can't. His laugh is good. His laugh is a problem. I would like to go back to discussing the owl. Hope almost smiled. Almost. He was right to be smug about the fire, Alex said. Don't. Don't what? Don't praise my father to me like you're giving me a gift. You had access to his work when it mattered, and you let the council burn his name anyway. Hope, Flint said. Quiet. Not a warning, just a note. Like a wolf placing a paw on a path and saying, this is the one. Walk it. She hadn't meant to say it. Not yet. Not this early in the night. But the truth rule was an old, patient thing, and it didn't care about her timeline. Alex didn't flinch. That bothered her. She wanted him to flinch. She wanted the composure to crack properly. Not the half-second laugh crack, the real one. The one that goes all the way down. I know, he said. That's not enough. I know that too. Then what? She stopped, closed her mouth. The fire popped, and a coal rolled to the edge of the pit. She nudged it back with her boot. I was 16, he said. I know that isn't an excuse, but I need you to know that I know it isn't an excuse, so that when I tell you the real reason I didn't act, you'll believe me when I say it's worse. She looked at him. He looked at the fire. I thought about this every solstice, he said. I watched you climb this ridge. Every year, same time, same bag, same trail. Every solstice, Flint noted, patient as stone. Hope's hand tightened on the poker. You watched me. 2 hours before sunset, canvas bag over your left shoulder. You take the switchback even when the direct trail would be faster, because the switchback passes the old Waykeeper marker, and you touch it every time you go by. The specificity of it hit her harder than any apology could have. He hadn't just known, he'd watched. He'd paid attention to the exact way she carried the weight of the thing his silence had given her. That's either devotion or surveillance, she said, and I'm not sure which one concerns me more. It concerns me too, if that helps. It doesn't. No, I didn't think it would. The fire needed tending. She reached for a log, one of the heavy rounds, and her arm crossed within 6 inches of his shoulder as she drew it from the stack behind his stone. He went still. Not stiff, still. The kind of still that wasn't quite human, too complete, too held. The animal underneath going quiet in the presence of something it had decided was important. She could see it in his hands. They'd been wrapped around the kettle lid, fidgeting, adjusting. They stopped. His knuckles were white. She placed the log, sat back, filed the stillness away. "You're cold again," she said. "I am always cold. I have been cold since the moment we left the Great Hall. At no point during this evening have I been warm. The blanket is helping. The barn drink is helping. But I want you to understand that I am experiencing cold as a permanent state of being. And the only reason I haven't mentioned it is that the third rule forbids complaining about it." "The third rule isn't real. I made it up to be funny." "I know, but it worked better than the real rules." She almost laughed. She caught it, held it in her chest like a spark she wasn't ready to feed. But it was there. The almost of it sat between them like a third presence. "She almost laughed," Karen said. And then, very quietly, as though confessing a state secret, "We are in significant trouble. I thought we were discussing the owl." "The owl is not going to help us." Hope looked at the overturned boundary stones that ringed the far side of the circle. The moment settled, the comedy thinned. She let it. "My grandmother placed those," she said. "The ones on your side of the fire, those are my father's. But the ring itself, the original placement, the angles, that was her. She walked the borders for 40 years. She said the stones talk to you if you listened." "Do they?" "No, they're stones. They are profoundly and stubbornly stones." A beat. "But they hold heat well. And they cut wind from 4 directions if you place them right. So maybe that's what she meant by talking." He looked at the overturned stones. She saw the exact moment the impulse arrived, the slight forward lean, the shift in his weight, the readiness to do something. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't. You were going to offer to fix them. I can see it in your shoulders. You have very communicative shoulders. They broadcast your intentions approximately 3 seconds before your mouth does. Don't. You don't know which direction they face." "She's right," Karen said. "We don't know which direction they face." The Granger system uses a sigil alignment method that we read about when we were 15 and then did nothing about for 13 years, which is a recurring theme this evening. "Fine," Alex said, out loud. The word left him before he could stop it. Karen's word, surfacing through his own mouth without permission. Hope looked at him, then at the fire. And for the first time all night, the faintest edge of a real smile touched her mouth. She didn't let him see it, but she let it exist. Chapter 4. The Dark Before Dawn. The stars had shifted. The constellation the old wolves called the Watchkeeper, a string of 7 stars that traced the outline of a wolf lying down, had moved from the eastern sky to directly overhead, which meant it was somewhere past the 3rd hour of morning and the coldest part of the night had settled in, with the commitment of something that intended to stay. Alex couldn't feel his feet. He had made peace with this. His feet were no longer his concern. They were someone else's feet now. They were the kingdom's feet. He wished them well. "Our feet," Karen said mournfully. "We had such good feet." "Stop eulogizing my feet." "Fine, but they were good feet, for the record." Hope had moved closer to the fire in the last hour. Not closer to him, she'd been precise about that, maintaining a distance that was friendly enough to be polite and far enough to be a statement. But the cold had closed in, and they were both now sitting within arm's reach of the flames, and the firelight made the space between them smaller than the distance suggested. He could smell her. He'd been able to smell her all night. Creek water and cedar smoke, and something underneath both that was just her, just the bass note of who she was. But in the last hour, with the cold pressing them closer to the fire and to each other, the scent had sharpened. It wasn't overwhelming, It was specific, the kind of scent that lodged in the back of your throat and set up permanent residence. Notice the way the fire reflects off the eastern stones, Cairn said. No, the reflection creates a secondary. We're done pretending you're interested in optics. A long, significant pause. Fine. It was the first fine that cracked, not the word itself, the silence around it, the absence of the deflection that was supposed to follow. Cairn, who had spent all night commenting on stars and owls and wind patterns and the reflective properties of boundary stones, had run out of things to look at. There was nothing left in the circle except the fire and the woman and the truth. And the wolf had finally stopped pretending any of those were unrelated. She was telling him about her father, not the political history, not the grievance. She was telling him about the stones, how each one was aligned to a specific border crossing so that a waykeeper standing in the circle could look at any stone and know which approach it guarded. How the sigils weren't decorative, they were a language. My father knew them by feel, she said. He could walk the circle in the dark and tell you which stone was which by the wear on the face. He said they talked to him. A pause. He was being dramatic, but he wasn't wrong. If you touch them enough, you learn them. The way you learn anything. By showing up. Her voice when she talked about her father had texture. Not softer, just real. The practiced flatness gave way to something that remembered and didn't try to stop remembering. Your cloak, Alex said. Hope looked at him. You should take my cloak. It's the coldest part of the night, and I have the blanket and the barn drink, and I've survived 11 solstices on this ridge without a king's cloak. I know. The fire is mine. The cold is mine. The cloak is yours. Keep it. I'm offering because offering is the thing you know how to do, she said, not unkindly, but clearly. Offering is easy. It's generous and it costs nothing, and it makes you feel like you've done something. But you haven't done anything. You've just offered. The words landed like a log placed in a fire, carefully, precisely, in the exact spot that would make the whole structure burn hotter. She is talking about more than the cloak, Cairn said. I know. Do you, though? The fire burned. She fed it. And in the quiet that followed, Alex asked the question he'd been carrying since sundown. What did it cost your family, he said. Specifically. Not the rank, not the position. What did it cost? Hope was quiet for a long time. The fire burned. She reached for a quarter-split log without looking, placed it with the exactness that came from 12 years of practice, and the flames climbed. My father was stripped publicly, she said, in the Great Hall. They made him stand in front of the full council while Elder Gormont read the finding. Your father sat at the head table. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence was the verdict. She paused. My father wore his good coat. He'd pressed it himself that morning. My mother told me that later. He pressed his own coat before they took his name. Alex's throat closed. His father, sitting at the head table, silent. The image was precise and terrible, and entirely consistent with the man he remembered. A king who governed by allowing things to happen around him rather than preventing them. After that, people stopped. She said it simply. They stopped coming to the house. They stopped buying our candles. My mother made candles, did you know that? Bayberry and cedar, best in the territory. She once argued with a woman at the market for 20 minutes about whether bayberry or tallow burned cleaner, and she won the argument so thoroughly that the woman bought 6 candles and came back the next week for 4 more. A ghost of something, not a smile, but the memory of where a smile used to live. They stopped buying them. They stopped looking at us at the market, not with hostility, worse. They looked through us, like we'd become see-through. The fire popped. Sparks rose and died in the cold air. My brother left. He was 17. He went north, to the Greywater territory, because they didn't know the Granger name there, and he wanted to be a person instead of a verdict. He sends letters. He has a mate now. 2 children I've never met. He named his daughter after our mother, which I think he did because he felt guilty about leaving. which I think is right, and I think my mother knows it's right, and I think they've both decided to let the name mean love instead of guilt. And I think that's the bravest thing either of them has ever done." "Hope," Flint said. The single word carried something that had been sitting quietly in the wolf's chest for 12 years. An old, worn tenderness that had survived everything else. Patient, unbroken, present. My mother got quieter. Not sad. She was never sad. She was furious. She was always furious. But quieter. The fury stopped having anywhere to go. She tends a garden now. The garden is very good. It is aggressive and overgrown and slightly combative, and it is exactly like her, and I love it. A breath. She doesn't come to the solstice anymore. "And your father?" Alex said. He had to say it. The truth rule was in his chest now, not in the air. Hope looked at the fire. The flames reflected in her eyes, and for the first time all night he could see the cost of the steadiness. The effort it took to sit across from the king and tell him, clearly, what his kingdom had done. "My father died 3 years ago. Quietly. In his sleep, which was a mercy because he deserved at least one mercy from this kingdom." She stopped, breathed. Her hand rested on the poker, and her fingers were steady, because they were always steady, because she'd trained them to be. He died believing no one in power had believed him. He died thinking the fire, his fire, the warning fire he lit the night of the breach, went unrecorded because he hadn't lit it fast enough. Because he'd failed. The silence after that was total. Her father had died, not knowing. And Alex had known, not because he'd investigated, because the records had been in his father's archive. His father's personal archive. The weather logs from the night of the breach, the watchtower duty roster showing Gormont's son had abandoned his post, the evidence that the Granger fire was lit and visible from 3 positions. His father had known. The old king had seen the evidence and allowed the Grangers to burn anyway, because Gormont was his closest advisor, and the alternative was public disgrace for Gormont's family. And the old king had valued the wrong loyalty. Alex had found the records 2 years into his own reign. He had read them in his father's study, sitting in his father's chair, and he had understood what they meant. That his father, the man who had taught him to lead, whose portrait hung in the council chamber, whose legacy Alex had built his entire kingship on honoring, had known an innocent family was being destroyed, and had chosen his oldest friend over justice. And Alex had put the records back. He had closed the archive. He had walked to the council chamber and sat down and said nothing. Because reopening the case meant standing in front of the kingdom and saying that his father had been wrong, that the king they mourned, the king whose name Alex carried into every decision, had allowed something unforgivable. And Alex had not been able to do that, not because of politics. The politics would have been easy. Gormont was dead. His allies had scattered, because it was his father. Karen was silent, not drifting, not deflecting, not finding stars to comment on or fires to analyze or owls to identify. Just silent. The wolf at the bottom of Alex's mind was lying very still, eyes open, watching the fire and the woman next to it. Done running. "He was right," Alex said. "Your father, he lit the fire. The warning was real. And I knew." The words left him and they didn't come back. "I found the records when I was 22, in my father's personal archive. The weather logs, the watchtower duty roster, Gormont's son abandoning his post. My father had seen them. My father had known." He looked at his hands. "And I put them back, not because of politics, not because of the council, because reopening the case meant standing in the great hall and telling the kingdom that my father, the man I built everything on, the man whose portrait hangs above the table where I sit every day, allowed an innocent family to be destroyed to protect his closest friend." He made himself look at her. "I chose my father's name over your father's name, and your father died carrying the weight of that choice." Hope didn't look away from him. She didn't soften. She didn't cry. She sat by the fire her father had taught her to tend, and she looked at the king who had kept the truth locked in a dead man's archive. and her face was steady as stone. "That is," she said quietly, "the first thing you've said tonight that I didn't already know." Finally, Flint said, not triumphant, not satisfied, just the word, landing in the dark like a stone that had been falling for 12 years and had finally hit ground. And in the long, honest dark, with the fire burning and the watchkeeper directly overhead, Hope Granger watched Alex Wolfgard stop being a king and become, instead, a man sitting in the wreckage of the choice he'd made between two fathers, one alive and wronged, one dead and wrong. And she watched him not ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask. That mattered more than anything he could have said. The fire burned. She fed it. The silence held. The cold pressed in, and neither of them moved away from it or toward each other. They just sat with it, the weight of two fathers and two names and 12 years of wrong that nobody had fixed, because fixing it meant breaking something else. Then Hope said, "My father pressed his own coat." She said it to the fire, not to him, the way you say something when you need to hear it one more time to make sure it's still real. Alex pressed his palms against his eyes. His shoulders moved once, hard, and then were still. When he took his hands away, his eyes were wet and he didn't hide it. He didn't wipe his face. He didn't perform recovery. He sat in the dirt with wet eyes and the blanket around his shoulders, and the barn floor drink still bitter on his tongue, and he let her see. She could see the wolf in him now, not the deflecting, drifting presence that had spent all night examining stars, the real one, close to the surface. The amber in his eyes wasn't firelight, it was cairn, looking at her through Alex's face with the terrible open stillness of a wolf that has finally stopped pretending it doesn't know where home is. Hope saw it. She let him know she saw it. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough for the amber to flicker, long enough for his jaw to tighten against whatever sound was trying to come up his throat. And then she looked at the fire. "Fine," Karen said, but the word had changed. It wasn't dismissal. It wasn't deflection. It was the sound a wolf makes when it stops running, when it lies down in the place it's been running from and admits it belongs here. "Fine." "What are you going to do about it?" she said. Not a question. A door. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was raw, half an octave lower than it had been all night, and she could feel his wolf in it, the real one, close to the surface, still. "Tell me what you need me to do," he said. "Specifically." She looked at him. He meant it, in the set of his jaw, in the stillness of his hands, in the way his wolf was utterly present behind his eyes, not performing contrition, not offering a blank check, asking for instructions, the way you ask when you're finally ready to do the work and you want to do it right. 3 things, she said. He waited. First, reopen the border breach finding, publicly, in front of the full council. Read the real records, the weather logs, the watchtower roster, Gormont's son. Make the kingdom hear what actually happened. She paused. "This means saying what your father did, in the hall where his portrait hangs. You understand that?" "Yes." Second, restore the Granger name in the Waykeeper records. Not symbolically, actually. Put my father's work back in the archive where it belongs. His diagrams, his annotations, his terrible handwriting, all of it. "Yes." Third, she paused. The fire crackled. The longest night was thinning at the edges. Not yet dawn, but the darkness had a different quality now, less certain of itself. "Third," she said, and her voice was steady but her wolf was not. Flint, who had been serene and patient and brutally honest all night, was doing something Hope had never felt from her before, something that felt like standing very still at the edge of a clearing and watching something approach and choosing, deliberately, not to run. "Come back to this fire," Hope said. "Not once, regularly. So the kingdom sees their king sitting with a Granger. So they know what it means." The third one was not political. Alex heard it. She watched him hear it, watched the shift behind his eyes when the request landed somewhere deeper than duty. This wasn't institutional repair. This was her, asking him to be here, with her, where people could see. Yes, he said, and his voice cracked on it. Just slightly. Just enough. Cairn, in the furthest, quietest part of Alex's mind, did something very small and very quiet. He lay down. Not drifting, not deflecting. Just lying down at the edge of a fire, beside the scent of creek water and cedar smoke, and closing his eyes. Home. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. Chapter 5. Dawn. The sky changed first at the eastern edge, a thin line of gray that wasn't quite light but wasn't dark anymore. The difference between a night that was still happening and a night that was almost over. Hope saw it. She always saw it. 12 solstices on this ridge had taught her exactly when the dark started letting go, and she knew the light the way she knew the fire, by feel, by instinct, by the particular way it changed the cold. The fire had burned all night. Every log she'd placed, every adjustment she'd made, every time she'd read the wind and shifted the fuel to compensate, it had held. The year ahead was blessed, if you believed in that, which Hope believed in the way she believed in most old things. Not entirely, but enough to keep showing up. Alex was standing. He'd been sitting close to her for the last hour, not because either of them had made a decision about it, but because the cold and the fire and the 12 hours of conversation had narrowed the circle until the distance between them was less a boundary and more a habit they'd stopped maintaining. His scent had settled into the cold air around her, pine smoke and something warmer underneath that her wolf had been sitting with all night in patient, infuriating silence. She thought he was standing to leave. The vigil was ending. Dawn was minutes away. He would walk down the ridge and go back to being the king, and she would stay here and tend the embers, and that would be that. But he wasn't facing the trail. He was facing the nearest boundary stone, the overturned one, the largest, the one with the running wolf sigil that had been pressed into the dirt for 12 years. Don't, she said. Reflex. He knelt. In the half-dark of the pre-dawn, the alpha king of the Wolf Guard territory put his hands into the frozen dirt and gripped the boundary stone that bore the Granger name. The stone was heavy. She knew exactly how heavy. She'd tried to lift it herself twice, and failed both times because it was a 2-person stone, and she'd been one person for 12 years. She could see the way his shoulders set, the way his weight shifted forward, the way the muscles in his forearms stood out against the cold. He wasn't doing this easily. He was doing it the way you do a thing that costs you, with your whole body, without grace, without asking for help. The stone came up. He turned it, set it upright, pressed the base into the earth with both hands until it held. Then he stepped back. His hands were black with frozen dirt. His knees were the same. He was breathing hard, and the breath misted in the pre-dawn air, and he looked nothing like a king and everything like a man who had just decided to start. The running wolf sigil faced east. Hope stared at it. It's facing the wrong direction, she said. Alex looked at the stone, looked at her. His face, exhausted, raw, amber-eyed in the pre-dawn, did something that wanted to be dignified about this and couldn't be. Which direction should it face? Northeast. The Granger stones on this side of the circle guarded the northeast crossing. East is the Dunmore approach. You've got my family guarding someone else's border. He tried, Flint said, and for the first time all night, the wolf's patience cracked into something that was almost fond. He tried and he got it wrong, and he is kneeling in the dirt at dawn. This is the most attractive thing that has ever happened on this ridge, and I include the fire. Flint, I'm allowed one. He knelt again, adjusted the stone. It scraped against the frozen ground and settled into the new position with the patience of something that had been waiting 12 years to stand up again. Better? He said. Hope looked at the stone. Her father's sigil, upright, facing the correct crossing for the first time since she was 13 years old. She didn't cry. She was not going to cry in front of the king on the solstice ridge while the sun came up. She was absolutely, categorically, as a matter of personal policy, not going to do that. Her throat had opinions about this policy. Her eyes had filed a dissent. The quiet, steady thing in her chest that had been holding itself together since she was 13 years old was reconsidering its structural commitments. "Better," she said. Her voice was rough. She didn't fix it. Alex stood. His hands were dirty. The knees of his trousers were black with frozen earth. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, like a man who had done something with his hands instead of his authority. She liked it. She was not going to think about how much she liked it. Not right now. Later, probably. Extensively. In detail. With annotations and possibly diagrams. Her father had been a big believer in diagrams. "There it is," Flint said. "The Granger in you. He's always been there." The sun crested the ridge. The first light hit the fire, and the flames went from orange to gold, and the boundary stones cast long shadows across the circle, and the Granger sigil on the standing stone caught the light and held it. Alex was looking at her. She knew that look. She'd seen it building all night, the way the firelight leaned toward what fed it. He wasn't performing anything. He wasn't managing. He was standing in the early light with dirty hands and wet eyes, and looking at her the way his wolf had been trying not to look at her for 12 hours. "You offered me your cloak," she said. 3 times. "I didn't need it." "I know." She crossed the distance between them, 3 steps. She'd counted them without meaning to. The exact space she'd maintained all night, measured in footfalls, in firelight, in the careful geometry of 2 people who hadn't been ready to be close. She took the cloak from his shoulders. Not because she was cold. She could feel the warmth of him in the wool. Body heat, 12 hours of sitting in the dark. The particular temperature of a man who had finally stopped pretending he was fine. She put it around her own shoulders. It was too big. It smelled like him, pine smoke and something warmer, something that her wolf had been patiently cataloging all night and was now presenting to her like a gift she hadn't asked for and couldn't return. "Finally," Flint said, "the last time." Quiet as a breath. And the word, which had started the night as an observation and become a judgment, and narrowed to a blade, landed now as something that had been waiting 12 years to be said without sharpness. Something soft. Something that sounded like a door opening after a very long time closed. Finally. Alex's hand found hers. She let him take it. His fingers were cold, genuinely cold, 12 hours on a frozen ridge. And hers were warm because she'd been tending a fire all night. And the difference between them was a small, precise fact that neither of them commented on. He kissed her in the first full light of the new day. Not grand, not desperate. Not the kind of kiss that stories build to with orchestral swells. He leaned down and she leaned up, and it was simple and warm and honest. And it tasted like cold air and barn floor drink and the end of something that had gone on too long. His hand came up to the side of her face. His thumb traced her jawline, and his fingers were still cold, and she didn't care. The kiss lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and not a second longer, and she would have stayed in it for another 12 hours. And she was not going to tell him that, and Flint was not going to tell him that, and the fire was going to mind its own business. Karen opened his eyes. "Fine," he said. "The last time." And the word, which had been a deflection and a denial and a surrender and a lie and a truth all in the same night, settled into its final meaning. Fine. This. Her. Home. Fine. They stood in the circle of old stones with the fire burning down and the dawn coming up, and his cloak around her shoulders, and neither of them moved to leave. The findings were read in the great hall on the 4th day after the solstice. Alex stood in front of the full council. 26 wolves, several of whom had served under his father, and all of whom understood what it meant that the current king was reading aloud from the previous king's personal archive, and read the weather logs from the night of the breach, the watchtower roster, the record of Gormont's son abandoning his post, his father's handwritten notes in the margin of the duty roster, which proved the old king had seen the evidence and made his choice. The portrait above the head table watched. Alex did not look at it. Marsh stood by the door with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had workshopped several speeches for this moment, and was now content to let the silence do the work instead. The Granger name was restored in the Waykeeper records that afternoon. Hope's mother came to the archive. She stood in front of her husband's diagrams, his terrible handwriting, his crossed sevens, his ink-stained annotations, and she touched the page with one finger, and then she left without saying a word. She started coming to the solstice again. On the first night of the new year, Alex climbed the ridge at sunset. He carried firewood. He stacked it wrong. Hope restacked it without comment and handed him the poker and told him to make himself useful. He sat by the eastern stones. She sat by the fire. The distance between them was 2 feet instead of 6, and neither of them remarked on the mathematics. His wolf lay by the fire and watched hers. Her wolf watched his. Cairn opened one eye. "Fine," he murmured. "Warm. Settled. Done." And far below them, the kingdom, which had opinions about everything and understood very little, saw the smoke from the wayfire, and knew that the Wolf-Guard king was sitting with the Granger firekeeper, and that the fire was burning, and that it would not go out.